Now, let's talk about something completely different because a British-owned cargo ship has been attacked off the coast of Yemen in another suspected attack by Houthi rebels. Well, we've seen US and UK airstrikes again and again now to try and deter those attacks. Doesn't seem to be working. Joining me right now to discuss this is Colonel Simon Diggins, former Middle East Defence Attache. Good morning to you, Simon. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Julie.
Okay. Look, obviously we've seen more and more attacks. We had attacks previously on British naval vessels as well. These airstrikes by the US and UK, backed by other countries, don't seem to be offering a deterrence. What more can they do?
I think they do what they have to continue to do, and we need to defend the principle of freedom of navigation and through the Red Sea. In terms of actually stopping the Houthi attacks, that I think is going to be very difficult. What they can reasonably do is when they know that the attacks are about to take place, then they can launch their attacks. And indeed, that's what they did on Saturday. They said there was clear evidence that attacks were about to take place. My understanding of this particular attack, which took place against the British-owned cargo vessel, though actually it was Barbados flagged, is that it may well have come from a small ship or a small boat that came alongside them and fired a missile at the bridge of the ship. So it could well have been a sort of like a kind of raid on the ship rather than a missile attack from elsewhere. And that might be harder to detect because there'll be lots of shipping moving around the area, fishermen, other boats, small boats, whatever it is. And if one of them actually turns out to be sort of an armed Houthi group who then attack the ship, that might well be more difficult to deal with.
Don't you into sort of Somali pirate style attacks, aren't you? Which again took a long time to overcome. I don't think it's ever been fully overcome. Let's talk more about what's been going on diplomatically. Of course, Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, once again, I think it's his fifth time going to the Middle East since October 7th attacks. He is, the man is getting his air miles in. There's no doubt that, but he also obviously understands the importance of face-to-face meetings, private conversations with both Israeli and Arab leaders. But it's interesting that the White House has had to go into damage control, denying that Joe Biden, US President, had called the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, I have to be careful of my language here, a bad effing guy in private, and fears that he wants to drag the US into war. It's an election year. We know that the American public are, pretty isolationist. No American president has ever been elected on a ticket saying, I'm going to get us involved in more wars. We're going to have more of our men and women dying overseas. This is causing big splits within the Democrat Party for Joe Biden as well. But of course, we know it's absolutely crucial that Israel has the backing of the US military might and diplomatic might for them to, well, frankly, even continue to exist. So how significant is this?
The split, I think, between what Netanyahu wants and what Biden wants, I think is very important. Biden was very quick to properly show support to Israel and Netanyahu after the dreadful events of October the 7th. And I think everyone thought that was the right thing to do. I think what nobody really anticipated was a sense in which Israel and Netanyahu, or parts of the Israelis and Netanyahu, really had, I think, almost a different agenda about how they thought it was going to sort this thing out. And God forbid it ever happened to anything to our guests, and we've still got, over 100 hostages, Israeli hostages, in Hamas's hands, which is a dreadful thing to deal with. But I think the sense in which this kind of the reaction, the Israeli reaction, and particularly the way that they use their military force, has created this kind of backwash against them, which I think has taken everyone a little bit by surprise. And I think Biden has been in sort of catch-up mode ever since. The issue is not just about Biden and his election, of course. It's also about Netanyahu and his political survival.
Yeah.
Because prior to October 7th, Israel itself, as you're well aware, had been in complete turmoil. And I think that's one of the other issues which we're trying to deal with. The country was divided, really badly divided, over the issue of their Supreme Court and its importance. And I think what Biden's found himself in is, if you like, in the maelstrom of Israeli politics, as well as in the maelstrom of the wider
yes,
politics.
and although he is Prime Minister, he's leading a very wide coalition, and he's widened since October 7th, but not actually a very popular figure among an awful lot of Israelis. And we've seen those protests, bearing in mind this is a country where you can have democratic protests and you're not actually, fired on and things. So small point worth making. In terms of where this all leads, there, a lot of people really concerned we are being dragged into another world war. It's bad enough with Russia and Ukraine, but just the escalation where you're seeing, problems with, the Hezbollah in Lebanon, you've got the Hamas in Gaza, and you've got the Houthi rebels as well, and American and US involvement and British involvement. This inevitably could drag us into something bigger. How concerned are you about that?
I think everyone has to be concerned about that. It is one of the options. I mean, there are elements of restraint going on. I mean, it's very interesting when America's attacked the so-called Islamic resistance in Iraq, when it's opposed, when it's dealt with those targets in Iraq and Syria. There's been lots of warning in advance. There's been a lot of signaling going on. Indeed, the very first counterattack against the Houthis was also well signaled in advance to give the Iranians an opportunity to withdraw their personnel from there. So I think that's going on, and Iran the same. Despite the rhetoric, and the rhetoric, of course, has been ramped up on all sides, but despite that rhetoric, they've also made it very clear they don't wish to get involved in a fighting war with America itself.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. There is a real danger that there's any one of these small incidents could spark something, but there are other voices and other sort of tensions, like pulling back,
trying to push
trying to
against that.
stop this.
Really appreciate you joining us, Colonel there, Simon Diggins. Appreciate that. Now,